The 2016 Silver Gavel Award for Other Media goes to Law, Justice, and the Death of Michael Brown, St. Louis Public Radio. The police shooting of Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri served as a spark that ignited a national debate and introspection into matters of race and the justice system. Veteran legal journalist Bill Freivogel skillfully covered Ferguson, shedding much-needed legal light on a local story that quickly emerged into the seminal national one. We now hear him discuss how he started writing about the law, justice, and the shooting of Michael Brown, and why the story went viral and became nationally significant.
I was at a wedding on August 9th, 2014, and we were in the middle of a beautiful apple orchard in Vermont. When my wife and I got to a computer the next time, we saw what had happened in Ferguson that day. It was really apparent right from the beginning that this was a big story. So as soon as we got home the day after the shooting, I sat down to the computer and wrote about the legal aspects that might not be entirely understood. One of the cases I wrote about was Tennessee versus Garner. And in that decision, the Supreme Court had ruled that police could not use deadly force to shoot a fleeing felon who was non-dangerous. So in some ways, it had some of the same attributes as the Darren Wilson shooting of Michael Brown. This was really an Arab Spring moment for social media in St. Louis. The power of the social media in millions of tweets in the days following the shooting, that this was an unarmed African-American who was shot by a white police officer without sufficient provocation. That really became the main initial story across the country. The one reason it took off as a huge story right at the beginning was that Michael Brown was allowed to lie in the middle of the street for 4 hours. One of the stories I eventually ended up writing was I took each of the witnesses' accounts as summarized by the Justice Department investigative report, which basically showed that initial view of this hands up, don't shoot narrative was really just a myth. No one heard him say, don't shoot. Having said that, the hands up, don't shoot myth is incredibly powerful. It actually points to a larger truth about the problems with police officers in general shooting fleeing suspects. I made a great effort to talk to different legal experts about what had happened and to put their often varying views into the stories, but then also try to bring them together in a way that explained it to a general public that was reading the story. The St. Louis Beacon, an online news organization, and St. Louis Public Radio newsrooms merged the December before the shooting. And so you had a much stronger newsroom that had had some time to work together and get to know each other. And then the story happened, and it became all-consuming. I hope that the stories were able to explain to readers and people in St. Louis and a broader audience how the legal system addressed the shooting of Michael Brown and how that incident was important to a much broader history of race and police actions in St. Louis and the nation.
Thank you very much. As you can tell, even though there's a picture of me in front of a microphone, it's not exactly a radio voice that I've got, but these stories were actually on the website, although every once in a while I'm on the radio. I've been a reporter a really long time, and in those almost 50 years, Ferguson was the biggest story that I think I've ever written about. There were 40 million tweets after Michael Brown's death, and those tweets helped create a new civil rights movement, and they also started a national debate about race, class, privilege, and really the American character that we see playing out today in Dallas. Today, as when Michael Brown was shot. I think it's really important for journalists to try to provide a careful, balanced, contextual story, and to try to cool some of the white-hot accounts that might go out over social media. I relied real heavily on these stories on some of the law professors who you saw in the pictures. I think I should mention in particular Dean Mike Wolf at St. Louis University, who he and his colleagues were very helpful to me trying to figure out what does Tennessee versus Garner mean when you get down to a jury instruction, a legal instruction for a grand jury. The professors at St. Louis U didn't really agree on what it should mean. I also want to thank my editors, Donna Korando and Susan Hager. As the end of the video showed, this is really a product of the new landscape of journalism that's emerged from the ashes of the past decade. The St. Louis Beacon was started by some of us who left the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. It then merged with St. Louis Public Radio. I think the people who really deserve a lot of credit for that are Tim Eby, who is the general manager at St. Louis Public Radio, and my wife, Margaret, who was the editor of the St. Louis Beacon. And this created a newsroom that had the heft to be able to take on this story. And my stories were just a small part of the really terrific coverage that St. Louis Public Radio provided. And finally, thanks to the ABA.